Hey there, this is going to be a fun one today because I've got something to talk to you about that is changing the complexion of a lot of churches and is going to continue to do that over the next little while, and it's really a conversation that we as leaders need to be having. Now, generally speaking, there are two types of people that will visit or eventually join your church, right? Some people are seeking Jesus for the first time, and some people are seeking a new place to worship. In church circles, we'll use the terms new growth and transfer growth sometimes to define these groups. And as I'm sure you already know, people choose a church for many, many different reasons. When an established Christian looks somewhere for a new place to worship, they're often seeking some combination of programming and theology that fits well with what they all believe. When a new Christian or somebody seeking the faith starts going to church, it's usually with a friend. So they're not really worried about that other programmatic theological stuff just yet. They're really just looking for somewhere safe to consider their spiritual life. And churches are used to these two groups and generally know how to handle them, but there is another group that's starting to emerge. And that's a group of Christians that are going to be resorting themselves throughout churches, largely fueled by recent events. So you might have noticed this already, that some Christians have started moving from congregation to congregation fueled by the pandemic. And that's going to mean a lot of moves that come with a lot of big feelings. And churches are going to be on both sides of this. People might leave a church because they're upset. And so those people at that church might be sad that they left. But then other people are going to join that church because they were upset somewhere else, which is going to come with expectations. And I think staff and elders need to be talking about this because they need to be prepared for everything that's going to come along with it. So in this episode, we're going to discuss congregation members moving from place to place and how that's going to affect the dynamics of your leadership and your church. And we're going to start talking about it right now. Well, hey there and welcome. My name is Mike. I'm one of the founders of Church Helper, and our mission here at Church Helper is to help churches make every decision on purpose. Now, before we get into today's topic, if you end up liking what you hear, please feel free to share it with somebody else. You can like or subscribe to the podcast or the YouTube channel. You can leave us a comment with what you think, or you can request us to cover another topic that maybe your church is struggling with. So with all that in mind, let's jump into today's content. In this episode, we're going to talk about something that's happening a lot in the church right now, but it's not likely something you've mentioned too much or really named, but I think it's worth a conversation on your team. And it's the sort of resorting of Christians among churches based on the outcomes and cultural shifts of the pandemic. I just find this stuff fascinating. Recently, Ed Stetzer, a pastor and cultural commentator, talked about how all this is happening on a podcast, and it really hit a chord with me. So here's what he said in regards to sort of regathering the church and what it all looks like now. And the question is, who's coming back and how many people are coming back? And I think some of that question is there's a great resorting going on. So people have left this church because they required masks and went to this church that didn't. But then this church over here did mention the name George Floyd or whatever else may be in that city or context. And those people were attracted to that church because of that, and other people left that church. So we're going in this great resort that's going on right now, and it's mainly driven by cultural currents rather than gospel fidelity, and I think ultimately this is new for leaders. Now, church leaders are used to people coming and going to their church for various reasons. I'm sure that every leader has had a conversation with somebody about why they left to go here or there. What's different this time is that a series of shared experiences that everybody views differently is causing it to happen simultaneously. Now, we've all seen this happen on a denominational level, where maybe a whole denomination changes their theology and people come or go. But we're talking about all the churches and all the denominations here, and that's what's so fascinating. As Stetzer says, you'll likely have people who are a part of your church for years, but are now disgruntled or leaving because of your stance on vaccines or a social issue. And now, as a leader, you feel both rejected and hurt because nobody quite really knows how to respond to it. On the flip side, You're going to have people that join your church in the next 12 months for that exact reason. They got upset about something their church did or didn't do and left, and they came to you. And because of that, whether you're asked or not, they've put expectations on you as to what your church should be doing. And you know it's going to come up right away, because as soon as somebody asks, hey, what made you come here? You're going to hear the whole story. So I'm going to give you 3 questions to begin with, but we've actually made a 10-question conversation guide specifically so that you could download it and bring it to your team and sort of have this conversation really holistically together. You can find that in the description of this episode below. So here are the top 3 questions that we think you should ask. 1, what's our approach to folks who tell us they left their old church because of a particular social stance or the vaccine? Now, I'm not saying you should come up with a company line, but you should all be talking about the same thing, probably, right? You don't want multiple staff or elders sharing different views and confusing people right out of the gate. Second question you should ask is, how are we explaining our mission and methods to visitors or potential new members? Maybe it's time to develop a top 3 things to mention in a new conversation, or make sure you have those handy on your website. And 3, how will we express empathy and stand firm when people tell us to change what we're doing or else they're going to leave? Now, this question might be the most important of these 3. Preparing for confrontation is always the best way to ensure that everybody has the best chance of coming out of that conversation feeling heard, and so that nobody says something that they regret a little later. In closing, I'll say this: church attendance is going to be down for the next few months or maybe years. It's almost unavoidable. Don't be tempted to throw out your church's mission for a few more butts in the seats in the short term. It's not going to be worth it, and it will cause way more harm than it will do good. Be prepared for the tough conversations that's going to come down, and trust that God has ordained you and your church and your ministry to do the things that you are feeling called to do. And that's it. Hopefully we helped you a little bit today. Please make sure you take a minute to like and subscribe to our podcast or our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of the episodes that drop every week. You can make sure you get a little bit of a weekly dose and thought on how to make your church make every decision on purpose by joining our email list. And if you ever want to connect with us, you can do that through email or our website, churchhelper.ca. And if you liked this week's episode, but you know somebody who probably won't see it that maybe should, you can head to our website, churchhelper.ca/blog, and you can print a transcript of today's episode. Thanks so much for hanging out. We'll talk to you again really soon.